Welcome to Living Outside the Box, a podcast that is associated with Outside the Box Consulting. I'm Dr. Ben Bowman, and I'm so glad to have you on this journey as we discover what it is to lead and to live outside the norms and outside the box. Today, I am so excited. I am so excited to introduce my friend, Reverend Amy Carlson, who is, in my opinion, an exemplary leader. She is the director of communications for the Mid-South Annual Conference. She is planting a church currently in the Louisville, Kentucky area and has served in ministry for many years prior to this. So, without further ado, I'm going to let Amy introduce herself to each of you. So, welcome, Amy.
Hi, thanks for having me, Ben. I'm really excited, and out of the box thinking is definitely my forte. So, thanks for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation. Yeah,
Absolutely. So, tell our listeners a little bit about who Amy Carlson is.
sure. Yeah, I started my first career in advertising and marketing. Did all my training through undergraduate, and then straight into website design firms. And in that capacity, I was a project manager. Being the liaison between the designers, the developers, and then the client and the printers, and bringing it all together into a cohesive marketing plan for each of our companies. And I did that for quite a while and realized that I really enjoyed taking a look at people and figuring out how they tick. But I felt like I was selling people things that they didn't really need, and that didn't speak to who I am personally. As a matter of fact, the only job that I have ever lost, where the boss was like, "This doesn't fit you," was a sales job, and I just couldn't bring myself to sell people things that they didn't need. She's like, "Maybe this isn't a good fit for you." Like, yeah, I think you're right. And I would have said for years, I'm no good in sales. And what I've realized is that it has to be something that I believe in. And if it's something I believe in, then that's something that I can share with others. And that really is what bridged me into my second calling as clergy. I really went back to school. I began to realize that people were using scripture for their own agendas, and my whole thought was, I kind of want to know it for myself. And so I enrolled in seminary and began that master's degree and started working into a church and thought, oh wow, this is where I belong. And amazingly enough, brought in all of that advertising and marketing into that world and ended up in this job with the Mid-South Annual Conference, where it has married my two worlds of the communications marketing piece with the church and clergy piece. And I don't know, here I am marrying the two together, and I can do it because God and community and ministry and fellowship, all of these things they're things I believe in. And so to analyze how people tick and how to bring them together, it works. So,
You have just given a perfect visual description of what relevant leadership is about. And as we look at, or as we continue, I should say, our look at relevant leadership in this podcast series, we want to focus today on fostering development. And you, Amy, just hit on one of the key words. So I want to kind of extract that word and talk about it a minute, and that is community. So, what role do you believe community plays in developing leaders, and what role did it play in your development as a leader?
yeah, so community and development of leaders. Well, I think that comes into figuring out how to draw the people out. I think about who I was as a congregation member, and I seriously have said many times, I sat in that church for years, not involved because I didn't know anybody needed me. I didn't know that my voice would do something.
Mhm.
And so here I was in this community and a sea of people, and it took one person recognizing me, recognizing something going on inside of me that to then draw me out and then connect me back into the community. It's like you come from within and then you're drawn out into this leadership position, but then you're connected directly back into that community to then engage with them in a different capacity. And so that really was one of the first steps of me becoming clergy leadership.
Mhm.
But then within that, I mean, as director of communications, I mean, we are spread out across 5 states for the Mid-South Annual Conference. This is a very large community. And then within that are all of these pockets of culture that show up in different tones. Even within Kentucky, there are different cultures. And so engaging with those communities to do the same thing that that individual did for me, which is look at those communities and then the individuals within them to engage with them on their culture, their skill sets, their calling, and then draw that out so that they can then re-engage.
Yeah, so at some level, you would agree perhaps that fostering leadership development begins with a relationship.
Absolutely.
The people that knew you there in the church and drew you out of uh, the understandings that you had about what maybe you could or couldn't offer and helped develop you into those areas, that started with them knowing Amy Carlson. And
Absolutely.
so, as you work in communications, and even now with your church plant efforts that you're doing in Louisville, relationships are critical to effective communication. But how does relationship building play out in the planting of a church?
Oh, well, it's key. You know, because of my marketing background, I can build the proposal, all the vision, the mission, and all of that, and that's great. I mean, the concept, the theoretical concept of the church exists, but without the people and the relationships, it just remains a concept. And so it really is that relational networking. But then each one of those people have their own story about why the church may or may not be a good fit, why they may or may not be scared to join. And so part of that is speaking to each of those individuals in that relational capacity that draws them out. Yeah.
Yeah, and thinking about relationships and leadership, something that we have talked about in this podcast before, and will continue to talk about because it is so critical. But relationships on a positive side build up people and they develop those leaders. But I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you think that any organization, the church or whatever, has maybe dropped the ball when it comes to relationship building? And if so, what could they do to rectify that?
Yeah, I put it in the everybody says 80% or 20% of the people do 80% of the work.
Mhm.
And what we find in organizations is that the same people are tapped over and over and over again until they are drained and exhausted. And then you begin to hear the phrase a pew warmer. And even some of our congregations that have launched, where it is congregation members that have launched their own church, what they have been shocked to discover is I didn't know I could do this. I didn't know I had the capacity, but yet they had been going to church for years, surrounded by, like one person was going, I didn't know I could set up a worship order. And yet they had sat in worship for years and years and years, experiencing a worship order. They just didn't know that they could. And so to talk about dropping the ball, I think it more has to do with like limitations.
Mhm.
So um, I have called it the spider web networking.
Okay.
I say, all right, I go into a church and I say I have about 20 people that are my key people. I know that they can do anything that I ask them to do. I know that they're going to do it well. I can relax and hand it over.
Mhm.
But if I always hand it to them, I've created that same spiraling of exhausting them, overusing them, and not tapping others. So I have to recognize that I'm limited. I can't know everybody in this personal capacity. It's just not possible, especially when you're at a very large church, which most of my churches I've been at have been anywhere from 250 to 500 and 700. That's a very large group of people to know.
Mhm.
So I'm going to take my 20 people and I'm going to go to my person and say, you know what? I need you to do this, but I also feel like maybe you're overextended. So who is your network? Give me your top five names. And if you were to tap somebody, who would they be? So
Mhm.
then now all of a sudden I've bridged from my network into that person's network. And then if they say, one of my questions is going to be, well, do you think they have the capacity? Are they overused? Is this a good calling for them? Well, if not, great. Give me their number. I'll call them and ask them who their network is. And from there, I'm able to spider web out past what my limited knowledge of people is and continue expanding out into community and bringing others in and connecting with their calling.
Well, and fostering that development. What a beautiful image that is. The idea of building that interconnected web of people developing people into leadership. So as you plant your church there, Amy, in Louisville, what are
Mhm.
some ways that you are beginning to develop that web, that network there as this church launches?
Well, I already had some connections, and then I'm planting this alongside Reverend Ashley Adkins, and
Yes.
so she also has her connections, and we've really been. I mean, we started with just an info dump. What's our database of people? And then we have just started working through those. But then we also have to consider the relational pockets. So as we connect with this group, how is that connecting to another expanding group? And so we've just been moving out that way, and then encouraging directly with individuals. Okay, if these are your five people that you're close to, why don't you go network with them? Like if you're sold on this church plant and you're interested, who's in that network where you can go connect with them relationally? Because they might be interested to hear what I have to say, but if they're not connected to me relationally, it's not going to have the same pull than if I send out somebody that is already connected and invested with that individual. Um, so relying on those relationships instead of expecting me to do everything. And I think that comes back to the 20% of the people do 80% of the work. I've sat in so many staff meetings listening to people be they feel dismayed, like downtrodden, like they've failed. And I'm like, no, you're just limited. You just have to spider web out and recognize the limitation and figure out how to expand past it.
It's that idea that we have to help people see beyond their own ability to have a vision. Like the leader has to not only guide and develop them, but they have to cast that vision for them to see bigger and broader things, and that's a wonderful thing to do. So practically speaking, what as you have looked at communications and planting a church, and of course communications, I can imagine the answer for this, but what would you say is something that is critical for a leader to understand before they can begin to develop other people? Because sometimes we go in and we just want to, change the world. We want to go in kind of John Wayne, and we have all these great ideas and we have this vision and we want to just put it into action. And sometimes that works, but many times that doesn't. So, what is something that a leader needs to know as they walk into an opportunity to develop other leaders?
I'd say that problems are creative resources. I'll take you into this. When I was in undergraduate, I did a studio art degree, and she would have us create these beautiful pieces, and then she'd be like, okay, erase it. All right, now you have to erase your whole thing. And then she'd have you on that same piece of paper, okay, create this. And you spend all this time creating this beautiful creation, and she'd be like, okay, tear it up. So you tear it up, and she'd be like, okay, now I want you to glue it back together. And she would take us through all these phases of creating and destroying and creating and destroying.
Hmm.
And what I discovered was every time I destroyed it, it hurt. I didn't want to, but every time I destroyed it, a new creative solution emerged and it created depth to the piece. Well, it's the same thing with humans. It's the same thing in communities. The problems are giving us creative opportunities. And so I like to go in without an idea.
Hmm.
I'm going in saying, all right, how do you tick? What is and isn't working? How would you like this to work? Like, how do you operate? Are you visual? Are you auditory? Are you super organized or are you disorganized? And then that allows me to then create something that speaks to the individuals, to the actual network, and that's where you can begin to dream and build. And then it's something unique as opposed to just a system I crammed in there and tried to make it work.
So, speaking in maybe general terms, give us a practical example of how you've done that.
Absolutely. I mean, with the cabinet, with our presiding elders as they, with the Mid-South Annual Conference, as they work through the appointment process, it was, all right, well, what resources do we have available? Where is the line of communication falling apart? Like, who needs this information? Are they receiving it? Is it working well? What are our capacities? And then I began to hear, where they were overwhelmed or where it was working, what they did like or what they didn't like. And then from there, we went and created online forums, a back-end system, an entire storage database of PDFs that the people can access. So now we've created a system of internal communications that really does assist them in the chain of communication to move an appointment process, but also to easily connect with clergy and churches to begin the process in the first place.
And did they receive that well, or did it take some buy-in to the
Um,
process?
I would say I think they're open to whatever. There's definitely a learning curve, especially since we bridged from predominantly a PDF paper form of the process to more, well, okay, that this has a link, and you begin with the link, and then it has a process to go through. And that's okay. I think that's the other thing is a lot of people are like, no, rigidity, this is how it works. Well, no, we'll figure it out. We'll get there. Let's be soft with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, and I say this with all due respect to Methodism, but someone said this to me 20 years ago that the unwritten um, kind of tagline for the United Methodist Church then was, "We've never done it that way before."
Yeah. I
And
see.
so,
I'm like, yes, let's do it
but
then.
see, that's me. That's the outside the box. Like, okay,
Uh-huh.
don't put me in a box and say, "Well, we've done this way." And I say it with all due respect because there are some things that do work, and we don't just want to throw the
Yeah.
baby out with the bathwater. But we have to be flexible enough as we learn and grow to um, adapt to and adopt new ways of thinking.
Absolutely.
Um, so with that, I kind of want to go a little bit bigger. So we've talked about your church plant, we've talked about the Mid-South Conference. Let's talk about the Global Methodist Church and the work that it's doing and your connectedness to that. So with regard to adapting and growing, how do you see the Global Methodist Church adapting to new situations and moving away from the old ways of thinking as they've come out of the United Methodist Church?
Well, one thing that I've seen that I really hope continues, it's really cool in this grassroots movement because the less you have, the more creative you are, and the more systems are established, then the more married to the systems we're going to become, right? So I hope that some of the fluidity will stay, but within that, I have really loved seeing the empowerment of the laity. Um, so for instance, from a branding perspective, all right, you know, I want branding to be clean because that is how we are recognized and noticed. But also, if I'm trying to empower all these different people, they're going to come with all different skill sets. They might be trying to do something in a Word document, and if I'm just worried that the logo is pixelated, then maybe I am squashing ministry that can actually be happening
Hmm.
because I'm so focused on that aspect.
Yes.
And so I am seeing that on a not just in branding, but on a large scale of let's go, let's do this. And it's creating empowerment of individuals that maybe in the past would not have gotten involved. They would have sat back and been like, well, they know what they're doing, so let them do it. Well, you know what? God called all of us, so let's all go do this. And I think that is really cool to see.
I couldn't agree more. The idea that we are now fostering leader development among a previously underutilized group in the church is just a beautiful thing. And the fact that that has really been championed by the clergy, the
Yeah.
people that founded the Global Methodist Church, that started that movement from the Wesley Covenant Association, really embraced this idea of it's going to be everybody together. And like you said so wisely, that it's all of us that have received a call from God, not just people who are ordained into pastoral ministry. But each person, if they've received Jesus in their heart, has been called to be a leader and to have the Global Methodist Church embracing that. Like you, I hope that never goes away. I hope that we have to depend on the grassroots movements
As
that we've
a
started.
communications director, when I put out any materials, I have made it a point that just in the listing, if I'm saying laity and clergy, I specifically put laity first, laity and clergy, not clergy and laity, because my hope is that even that tiny little thing will begin to shape a mindset in all of us that it's laity and clergy, not clergy and then throwing on the caboose of the laity.
Yeah,
I
that's
hope
thoughtful.
it's an impact.
I really like that. And I appreciate that. For those of you that are listening, I'm in the Mid-South Conference. I'm a member here and I'm laity, and I really appreciate that kind of thoughtfulness is being seen to. So, um again, you wear multiple hats, Amy, with the GMC, with the annual conference, planting a church, you know, what are some practical things that you would offer, some wisdom that you could offer to people in those arenas, whether it's people in your church plant or in the Global Methodist Church, to help kickstart them into wanting to develop leaders? Like, what advice can you offer an up and coming leader?
I mean, I think the goal is to work yourself out of a job,
Wow.
really. Um, and people will say that, but I mean, I truly try to embody that in my leadership style. I can go in and try to do everything and because I want it done my way
Yeah.
and try to hold all of the different things. Well, one, I'm going to wear myself out.
Yeah.
I'm not going to have anything left to give. Two, I'm not empowering others. And three, I'm not creating an expansive anything, any organization. It needs to be expansive. So, what does expansive look like? That looks like figuring out who the people are, what their skill sets are. Like in serving, I tell people if you have served and maybe you're physically tired because you've done some work, but at the same time you feel refilled and refueled, like you're more alive afterward, well then you know you're leading or serving in the right spot.
Yeah.
And maybe it's for a season, like if suddenly that's no longer the truth for a year, well then maybe let's revisit this. Maybe you're no longer serving in the right spot and we need to do some adjustments. But really tapping into that capacity that leadership isn't about grinding yourself into the ground, doing all of the work. Leadership is about tapping into each of the pockets, empowering those individuals, creating those networks, and then creating a movement that goes forward together. And eventually, if you've done your job well, you've worked yourself out of the job because everybody's empowered to do the work.
Amen. Amen. In your life, because you're talking about, you know, being empowered and leaders burning out, I'm curious, who has been that person in your life that has poured into you that helped develop you as the leader you are today?
I've had a few key ones. One of the first ones I would say is Reverend Brian Ebel.
Mm,
He planted a church, and it was that church that I was evangelized and discipled within. But
mm,
he poured, I mean, poured into me for years. As I mean, we've had every possible role of, pastor, congregant, mentor, mentee, a professor, student, boss, employee. We've managed to cross all of these, and in all of those capacities, he was definitely pouring into me. Another, and she really has only been in my life comparatively a small amount of time, is Reverend Jessica LaGrone. Um, she was in my congregation and my small group, but then also at my seminary. And I've just had that ability to see her as female leadership.
mm.
That as clergy, we don't get a lot of that. We don't get a lot of female leadership to look to. And so um, seeing her in action has poured into me. It's been in a different way, whereas Brian and I were very lots of mentoring and one-on-one. Jessica, it was just getting to see her do what she does
Yeah.
spoke to me, and I think has shaped some of my leadership style as well.
And you bring up a critical point, Amy. So, talking about fostering leadership development, how does that look different when you're fostering leadership development among a group that may have felt overlooked or, like we said earlier, underutilized with the lady? But thinking about female leadership in the clergy, how does leadership development look there maybe differently than male leadership development? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. It's tough. Um, I found myself a lot of times trying to emulate the male leaders that I saw, and I began to realize there were certain elements of that just don't speak to me. Like for instance, I can sit in a room of male clergy and they'll start spouting off all their Bible facts. Well, that's not how my brain works. I'm way more relational and like, who is God? Who am I? And how are we supposed to be relationally? And so they would engage in all of these conversations, and I think, well, I'm not capable of doing this. This isn't.
Hmm.
And then I began to question, am I called into this? And I began to just realize I'm different. My brain works different. My capacity is different. I mean, even my speaking style up on stage is different. I mean, you see me with my hands, I'm a going. So,
Do.
I've embraced those things, and that's something, Ashley and I have talked about in female leadership. We're planting this church together as dual lead pastors. Like we are joined in partnership rather than a lead and an associate. We are both leading.
Hmm.
And we had that conversation of maybe it's going to look different. And we've never seen two females lead. We've always seen a male and a female, or two males, but not two females. So it's new territory.
That's
And so some of it is kind of like going into a male-dominated world, and I don't mean that negatively. That's just the reality of like
yeah.
the numbers
It,
of there's more men than there are female clergy,
yep.
and going in and saying, okay, this is how they're being trained. Then I have to kind of creatively adapt it to myself and say, all right, well, this is what this looks like for me as a woman.
Yeah. And again, relating back to what we said earlier, that it's highly relational, like leadership development and fostering new leaders. What I'm hearing you say is it's very tailor oriented to their individual abilities and the way that they're made,
Yes.
not necessarily cookie cutter. This is how the 8 steps by this method, and you'll be a great leader.
Well, so here's what I say. I love to create a system. I'm definitely Methodist in that regard, but a system needs to also be organic. So
Yeah.
it can be a guide that I mean, it's kind of like our doctrine. Our doctrine is our rail guards to make sure that we're staying in our lane. Well, a system can do that for us, but then within that system, we can kind of begin to move organically and push on those limits a little bit and be like, well, this maybe we can move it a little.
Yeah.
But it still informs and shapes and directs.
Absolutely. It's like when people say that, they read the Bible and it's a set of rules and it's so heavy-handed, and it's like, no, it's the framework, it's the guide frame for life, and everything inside those guidelines brings freedom.
Yes.
That these are our rails to keep us on the pathway that leads to eternal life, and everything inside those is freedom. And so I like that you put it that way. Um, I I want to phrase my last question a little differently than I've written it here, Amy. So I was going to ask, just in general, what outside the box tip you might offer to aspiring leaders or those who are developing leaders today. But I just feel a pull to ask that in a more specific way. Because the numbers are more male than female clergy, I want you to offer, if you will, a piece of advice to women in leadership. What outside the box advice would you offer to women in leadership, those who are either the leaders developing other leaders or emerging female leaders?
Yeah. I would say dare to do it like a woman. Because it's tough. It's tough. Like we really do as humans, we want to be accepted and we want to be seen as competent. And when you're at a table, it's like a child, right? You raise up a child and they learn by watching you and then emulating it. And
Hmm.
so if I'm at a table filled with men, I am and as like when I licensed local school, when I was first starting, I'm watching and I'm learning and I'm emulating. And it has taken years to say I'm gonna dare to do this like a woman. And it really doesn't look all that different, I'm sure, to an observing eye, but it feels very different to embody being clergy and a pastor in a way that suits me as a woman versus me trying to do it like the men do it.
Hmm. What a wonderful piece of advice. Dare to do it like a woman. I like that. I like that. Thank you so much for that. I mean, it's been enlightening because again, as we've said, you wear so many different hats across so many different strata of leadership. And I think we're living in an age where people are wanting to find stable, consistent, relevant leadership. And that's what we're talking about here is how to be relevant, not necessarily the relevance that the world says, where we have to change with every whim and notion of modern thinking, but relevant in the sense that we are rooted in the truth and that we are constant and consistent across different movements of modern thinking. So, thank you so much for sharing how to be a relevant leader as you foster leadership development, especially here at the end of the podcast, as we've talked about among female leadership, which is as crucial because, as you said earlier, we are all called by God, not just certain pockets of people. We're all called by God to lead. So, thank you so much, Amy, for joining us today on Living Outside the Box. Again, I'm Dr. Benjamin Bowman. You've been listening to Living Outside the Box. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button there on Spotify and visit our website at www.outsidetheboxconsulting.org. We'll see you next time.